All right, we have this application here, and I previously created this one for my channel, and I was using React Query and Typescript and all this good stuff that we're going to use here also. But in this video, I'm going to show you how to convert this one into Redux Toolkit. So that's the cool stuff about this, and it's the exact same application, but I've converted it to use Vite instead of Create React App, as this application is a few months old now, and I usually just use Vite nowadays. So that's what I've been doing. So this is the app here. You can change the currency and see the current Bitcoin price. A plain little application that will show you, the Bitcoin price. So that's all. Okay, so let's check out the code. So I have this previous code here. I'm using React Query, as I said, and we actually just have one other state here. So that's the currency that we're going to set and change in that little box that we have here. So that's the state for that one. And then we grab the data from the API, and this is an open API, blockchain.info/ticker. So that's the one that I'm using here. And this is quite a small application, and that's good because Redux can be very confusing actually. And I know that a lot of people are afraid of Redux. And to be honest, I'm not using it if I don't have to. I think it's enough with the context and stuff that's built into React. But the fact is that you need to know Redux if you're going to work with React for a company, because a lot of applications use Redux. So you have to know about it and just deal with it if you end up in a company that uses Redux. So anyways, that's my highly personal opinion about Redux. So I found out that I don't need it most of the times, but it's good to know about it. So I also want to know about it. And I have this fairly new stuff that's called Redux Toolkit. That's kind of a layer over React Redux to make it a little bit more simple to work with. So we're going to start by creating this currency state here and do all that stuff. And of course, we need to install the dependencies that we need also. So go inside of the terminal. And I have also a file for you if you download it from or clone it on my GitHub, where you can start. It says start here in the name. So start from that one and run npm install first to install all the dependencies. And then we're also going to install these Redux dependencies. So we have the first one, and we can actually check out the Redux Toolkit page. So here, I selected Typescript Quick Start. The types are already built in for Redux if you're using the latest version, as we're going to do. Yeah, it says here that is already included, so we don't need to install them separately. But if we check out the quick start, you can see that we have this little line here. We need to install both Redux and Redux Toolkit. And yet again, that's because Redux Toolkit is just a layer over React Redux. So you need React Redux to use Redux Toolkit. And we're also going to use something in this tutorial that's called RTK Query. And you can compare it with the React Query. I think they actually are inspired of React Query, to be honest, because a lot of stuff seems to be the same here. So that's the one, but we're not going to use that from the start because we're going to create our state. RTK Query is an extra library that you can use. So you don't need to use it with Redux if you don't want to do that. And you don't need to use Redux Toolkit either. You can use just plain Redux. But I actually recommend you to always use Redux Toolkit because that's the easiest way to implement Redux in our application. All right, enough said about that. We're going to start off by installing this one here. So we copy this one here. npm install redux.js/toolkit and React Redux. Go back to our terminal and we paste that in and wait for it. And RTK Query is actually built into Redux Toolkit. So we don't need to install anything for that one. So we can start up our application again, npm run dev. And just make sure so it works just as before, and it does, so that's good. So that's the libraries that we need for this one. So we can see that they are correctly installed here in our package.json file. So we have the Redux Toolkit and we have React Redux, so we're good to go. So the first thing we're going to do here is to create our little slice of state. They call it slices now in Redux Toolkit. So we have this app here. We only have this main component in this little application. And the state is just going to be the currency here. So we're going to create a state slice that's called app. And we do it inside of the src folder. We create a new folder that we call features. And this is just ripped off from the site for the tutorial for Redux Toolkit. So they place it in the features folder. And inside there, I'm going to create a new file that's called appslice.ts. And that's because our component here, our page, is the app page. So that's why I call it app. So if it would have been something else, maybe a movie page for a movie component, then you can call it movie slice.ts. So you can separate them up, and you can also create subfolders here for each slice, so to say. So inside appslice.ts, we're going to create our state. So we import something first here, import create slice, and we need payload action from at Redux.js toolkit. These are the ones that we need for this one. Then we have some types. Import currencies. I've already created these types inside of the Bitcoin types file. You can see that currencies is an enum. And that means that you can only use these ones here, even if they are strings as they are here, the different currencies. So you kind of lock it so it can only use these values. And you can see that this is the Bitcoin data that we get back. So each currency is going to have these properties here. And when I use the key in currencies here in the type, you can see that it loops through them here. And each currency has these properties. So that's very sweet to use an enum like this. So go back to the app slice. So we can create our app state. First, I'm going to create a type for that one. I call it app state, not state, app state. The correct one. And then we have the currency. And it's going to be of the type currencies. So this will lock it to that enum. And you can see that this is an object. So you can easily add something else here if you want to do that. For example, a movie state or a movie title, but we're not going to do that. So you can just add on this state, so to say, because it's an object that you can expand however you want. And then we have our initial state, const initial state. And we use the app state as a type. And we set the currency to US dollar. And now you can see that it complains here. And that's what I wanted to show you, because now, even if we type in USD as a string, it will complain because it's not of the type currencies. So we have to grab the value from currencies. That's the enum.usd, and that will work. So it's locked in to use only the values from that enum, and it's very, very good to do it like that. All right, so that's the initial state. Then we export a const that we call appslice, because this is for the app page. And then you can see up here, we imported this function up here, create slice. So we call that one and we give it an object, and then we can create our state here. So this is new with Redux Toolkit. It's a little bit easier because now we create a state and we also get our action creators and our reducers in the same place instead of separating it up and hook it all together later. So first we can set a name for this one. I call it app. Then we provide the initial state. I just have to type it in like this, has the same name as the property here. So that's why I just have to type it in one time, because this is ES6 syntax. Then we have a property with the reducers. So we give this an object, and we're going to create the reducer for this one. So this is going to be for changing the currency. So change currency like this. And this one is going to be called with a function that gets the state. And then we have the action. And the action is going to be of the type payload action. Payload. Oh, no autocomplete. Okay. And this is a generic that we can give the currencies like this. So this payload action is what we imported up here. That's a type that we can use, and it's a generic, so we specify what type or payload is going to be. So we can check the action here. You can see we have the payload and the type. The type, the action type, is going to be auto-created, so we don't have to do that ourselves, as we do have to do with original just plain Redux. So that's great that we don't have to do that on our own. And from our state, we have the currency. That's the one that we created up here. And when we get a new currency, we want to set the new currency from the payload, action.payload. payload, like that. So that will set the new currency for us, and it should be equal because now we're setting the state. And you can see here also that we're actually mutating the state here because we do it like this instead of using the spread operator and create a new state and all that. And that's because they are using the little library called immer in Redux Toolkit. So you can actually modify the state as if it was mutable. So you can actually modify the state in a mutable way, but it will be updated as you were doing it immutably, so to say. So that can be handy sometimes and a little bit confusing actually, because I'm so used to doing it in an immutable way. But it's also quite handy to just be able to do it like this. So that's good to know that you have immer built in inside of that one. So this is everything we need to do here. That's the only reducer we need, and the only action creator that's going to be created is for updating the currency in this little application. So that's the slice of the state here, so to say. And then we export a const, and we destructure out the change currency, the one that we created here, from the app slice dot actions. And this is how it gets auto created. The action creators gets auto created like this. And the last thing we're going to do is to export default the app slice dot reducer. This will provide us with the reducer. So this is how you do it with Redux Toolkit. Instead of dividing it up in all different places with reducers and action creators, we have it in one file, and we can create a slice of the state here and separate them up like that instead. So if we had another page, we create a new file with a slice, and that slice corresponds to that page. And it will be merged together in the global state in the store. That we're going to do now, because now we have our little slice of state for the app. So we're going to create a new file here in the src folder that's called store.ts. And in the store, we import something that's called configure store from Redux Toolkit. And then we have our slice reducers. So we import our app reducer. This one is a default export, as we did in that file down here. So we don't use curly brackets like this. From dot features. And we have our app slice. And then later we're going to use RTK Query, and we're going to merge that one into the store. But for now, it's enough. So we export a const called store. And we call the configure store that we imported. We give it an object. We have the reducer, and this one is called app. And we have our app reducer like this. We create our store with the configure store function, and we provide it with an object, and that object has a property that's called a reducer. And that one also has an object, and inside of here we can kind of merge together all our reducers. So if we had more than this one, we would specify them here. For example, as I said, if we have a movie, we can add it in like this. But now we don't have that one. So I'm going to remove it. So you just combine them here. And then we're going to do a little trick here. If we go back to the page, you can see here, if we read the Typescript documentation, we should define the root state and dispatch types, because otherwise, as you see here, we don't need any additional typings. And that's why we want to extract the root state type and the dispatch so they can be referenced as needed. Inferring these types from the store itself means that they correctly update as you add more state slices or modify middleware settings. So we should export these ones from the store so we can use the type root state and the type app dispatch, because we're going to use those later. So we can actually just copy these ones here, go back to our code, and paste them in here. And this will create these types for us that's called root state and app dispatch. And we're going to use this in our application. We're actually going to create a new file in the src folder that we call Redux hooks.ts. And inside of the Redux hooks, we're going to do some stuff with those types that we created. So if we go back again, you can see that they say here that you should define the typed hooks. As they say here, it's possible to import the root state and app dispatch into each component. It's better to create typed versions of the use dispatch and use selector. Use dispatch is the hook that you use when you dispatch an action, when you want to change something in the state. And use selector is when you want to grab a value from the state inside our application. So yeah, we could use them plain as they are, but we have to type them every time as they say here. So it's better to create hooks that are actually typed with those ones from the start. So we use those hooks instead. And that's the great stuff with the hooks in React, that you can compose things together and you can create your own hooks. So you can reuse them in different components. So we can copy this one here again, here in the documentation. Go back, we paste it in our file, Redux hooks. They import something that's called the type use selector hook, and use dispatch and use selector. These are the ones that we use, as I said, for dispatching actions and when selecting something from the state, when we grab a value from the state. And the root state and the app dispatch are the ones that we created here from the store. And now we create new hooks here that's called use app dispatch and use app selector. So you can see how they have this use dispatch here, and that is a generic. So it will get the app dispatch type. And as we export this const here, this one will always be typed with this app dispatch. And you can see that it has the app state here that we created. So that's good. And it also has the thunk. And they mentioned that in the documentation also. If you're using thunks, you have to type that every time, and you don't have to do that now. And the app selector, you can see that it has a state here also already typed for us to use. So that's great. We're going to use these hooks instead of grabbing these ones directly. All right, we have our store and we have our piece of state for the app. So we're just going to wrap our application with this little provider for Redux. So inside the main.tsx, for now, we can leave React Query. We haven't done anything with that yet. So we import store from ./store. And we're also going to import the provider. Import provider from React Redux. So for now, we're going to leave the query client provider also. That one is going to be removed later. Now we have the provider, and the store is going to be the store that we created. And make sure that we have everything wrapped inside of that one. Otherwise, Redux won't work. So I'm just making sure that the app still works. We're loading it, and it works. That's great. And we don't have any errors. Then we go inside app.tsx, and we're going to swap out this local state here to the Redux state. So we have our hooks. We import the use app selector that we created, and also the use app dispatch from the Redux hooks. And these are naturally the ones that I talked about here. So we import them and use them now in our component. And const with the structure out the currency equal use app selector. We have our state, and from the state dot we have the app state. That's the slice that we created. And now it complains here because we already have this one that's called currency. So we remove it, and we don't have the set currency. So instead we have the use app dispatch. And we also need to import from the app slice the change currency action creator here. So actions, import change currency. So use app dispatch, and we give it the change currency. And that one will get the target value when we select the new value. Of course, we shouldn't use this one directly because this is the hook. So we have a const dispatch, and we call the use app dispatch like that. Then we use the dispatch. So we should have the return value here. That's the dispatch. You can see that it has the thunk and the app and everything here. So we dispatch that action. And this one should work. Now we have hopefully successfully swapped out the local state to the one that we have in the Redux store. We can get rid of these types because we already typed it in the store. So go back here, reload it, change currency, and you can see that it still works the same, but we're using Redux instead. Pretty cool, pretty cool. But you can see that there's a lot of stuff just to get one little value here. There's a lot of stuff you have to do with Redux. So that's why I don't actually like it that much, to be honest. I think it's too complex for when you want to do just simple stuff. But I totally get it. If it's a large application, that it will probably be better to use it. But actually, I worked on a very large application, or at least pretty large application. And I was just using context, React query, and local state, and it worked like a charm. We can also remove this use state. So I don't know. I think it's personal preferences, and I'd also think that a lot of people think that you have to use Redux because everyone was using it before we had all these new great libraries. So that's why. Okay, in the next part here, we're going to swap out React query and use RTK query instead. And as I said, you don't need to use that if you don't want. It's just a better way, I think, in Redux to handle the data fetching and your server state and all that stuff. So that's what I'm going to do next. All right, so let's do it. We are going to create a new folder in the SRC folder that we're going to call services. This is also from the documentation. They like to place this API stuff in a folder that's called services. And inside of that, we have a new file called app.ts, and that is because the service is for our app component. So we import something that's called create API, and also something that's called fetch base query from redux.js/toolkit. But that won't work because we have to grab it from query and from React. So that's the complete import there. Then we need some types for this one. We import the Bitcoin data from Bitcoin types, and you can actually do it a little bit more explicit. You can import it as a type, and then you will instantly see that this is a type. Then we're going to specify our base URL, base_URL. It's going to equal a string. And we actually have the base URL in the app. If we look here, we can grab this one here, go back to the services. And this one here, it's kind of the base URL, but I'm not going to do it that way now because I think this is the base URL. So we're going to add in that ticker to the actual endpoint later here. So we have all the info that we need now, and then we export a const and we call it Bitcoin API equal create API. That's the function that we imported up here. And we give it an object. There's a property called reducer path. So we have a path for this reducer, and I like to call it Bitcoin API, just the same as the function. And this is a TypeScript, so you can see you have everything here is auto-completed, and you can see it here in the IntelliSense. That's very sweet. You can see what properties you have available for you. And we have one property that's called base query. And we import something that's called fetch base query. And that one has an object and a property called base URL. And we give it the base URL that we created up here. So that's how you set up the base URL and the name for your reducer. And then we can create different endpoints. We have something that they call a builder. So I guess it's because it will build the endpoints. Like this. So these endpoints will have a function that will get called and build our different endpoints. So inside of this one, you can specify all the different endpoints that you want to have for your API. And I have one that I want to call get Bitcoin data. That's the only one that we're going to have. And from the builder, we have something that's called query. You can see that you have a mutation also if you were about to do a mutation. So build a query. This is a generic, so we can specify it with some types. We have the Bitcoin data. So that's the type for the data that we're going to get back. And then we also need to provide it with a second one, and that is going to be the param if we were about to send in a param before we hit this endpoint. In our case, it's going to be undefined because we don't need to do that. And then we have yet another object, and we specify the query and give it a function. And this is where you can specify the extra stuff that you need in your endpoint. And in our case, we need a ticker endpoint. So if you were about to have a param here, that's, let's say it was a string, then you can add that param in here. So let's say that you have a movie name here, and then you can add that one in. So you get access to that variable you send in here. But we don't have that, so we specify this as undefined. All right. So this is how you build an endpoint with the RTK query. You create a reducer path, you name it to whatever you want, and I like to name it the same here. And then you set the base query, and this base query is going to be used for every endpoint that you specify inside of here. So you can add on stuff to the base URL here to create different endpoints. And then we're going to export const a hook, and this is going to be a hook that is auto-created for us to grab the data. It's kind of like use query in React Query, if you use that one. Use get Bitcoin data query. It needs to be called exactly like this. So we destructed that one out from our Bitcoin API. If we were to name it something else here, it won't work because it has to be named use, and then it's the name of the endpoint that we created, and it adds query, as this is a query. If it was a mutation, of course, you should add mutation to it instead. So this is the hook that is auto-created for us when we create this Bitcoin. This Bitcoin. No, we haven't created any Bitcoin. When we created this API route here for fetching the Bitcoin data. All right. So this is our endpoint. And now we can use it inside of our component. But first, we have to specify this in our store. We have to add it inside of the store itself. So we can import it here. We call it services. Import Bitcoin API from services app. Great. And then we add it at the top of the store. So we have this computed property here, Bitcoin API dot, and we have something that's called reducer path. That is also created for us. And then from our Bitcoin API dot, we have the reducer. Let's see, so it works. Yeah, and it will work. Also, if we want to use the cache and also refetching and stuff, we need to specify the middleware for this one. You will get a warning here also, so you can actually do that first, so you can see the warning in the console. So go inside of the app, and we have the hooks here. So we import use get Bitcoin data query from the services. And then we go down here, and instead of this one here, we have almost the same API, so we can just swap this one out here at least. Use get Bitcoin data query, and this will of course not be the same here. And you can see that it complains now because it expects 1 or 2 arguments, and we don't have any arguments for this one. We don't need to send anything in, and that's why I specified it as undefined. So specify this one here also, and this will hopefully grab the data for us. You can see that it just works because we have the same API here. So go back to the application, and it works. We can change the currency and all that stuff. And now you can see this little warning here, middleware for RTK Query API at reducer path. Bitcoin API has not been added to the store. Features like automatic cache collection, automatic refetching, etc. will not be available. So that's what we will have to do also in the store. So just below the reducers in the store, we have another property called middleware. like that. Get default middleware. And then we call this one like this. And then we concat. And here we can specify every middleware that we want. In our case, we have a middleware from our Bitcoin API that is auto-created. So we concat that one in. And I actually did something wrong here. It should be like that. Don't forget the comma. So this middleware property has this function here. And then we can use concat to add in the middleware for our own API that we created in the services. All right. So if we go back to the application now, you can see that it doesn't complain now. So that's great. It works. But I also want this one to be refetched every 5 seconds at least. So go inside the app again. We had this interval time before, and now it's actually not called the same. It's called pollinginterval instead. We can use the interval time. And let's do some console log so we can see that it actually refetch it. We can also get rid of all this stuff here. That's React Query specific. Like that. And we also go to the main and we remove the React Query stuff here also. And we can also remove it from the package file. I think that's everything. Let's make it a save all. I go back to the application. Let's see if it refetches after 5 seconds. And it does. So that's very, very nice. It works. It actually works exactly the same as before, but there's a lot more stuff going on now, I think, and it's a little bit more complex. But hopefully you learned something in this video about Redux Toolkit and Redux and RTK Query, React Toolkit Query. Yeah, I guess it's a little bit more complex to use, but it actually works. And I think this is actually better than just old plain Redux. I like this Redux Toolkit more, to be honest. So I think it works better. So as always, see you in another one.